Welcome to my video. Let's explore why Social Security is a horrible program and should be abolished. First of all, Social Security is unconstitutional and the federal government has no authority to operate such a program. Blow the dust off your United States Constitution booklet, and go to Article 1, Section 8. Do you see any such authority? Some of you may say that at the top, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So what does this mean? Think about it. Do you really think that the founders intended to give government an unlimited power? Of course not. James Madison clearly refuted this erroneous assertion in Federalist Paper No. 41. Pause and read what he said. He made it clear that this was just a preamble, a general statement, and to call it a blanket power was an absurdity. The general statement was followed by the enumeration of particulars that limited the federal government. It was further limited in the Bill of Rights by the 10th Amendment. All powers not delegated rest with the states and the people, which includes you. Some of you may be thinking Alexander Hamilton advocated quite the opposite view, but he didn't do so until after the ratification of the Constitution. Hamilton believed monarchy was the best form of government. He wanted presidents to reign for life as well as senators. This also included the president appointing governors for the states. He believed the Alien and Sedition Act was constitutional because it promoted the general welfare. The American people clearly repudiated this message with the election of me, Thomas Jefferson. So the Constitution stands? Social Security is unconstitutional, and if you don't like this fact, feel free to pursue the process of amendment. I know a few of you are saying, wait just a minute, the Supreme Court has ruled it constitutional. Halvering versus Davis. Aha, they say. The Supreme Court labored under an unprecedented attack by Roosevelt, who threatened to pack the court with his supporters. The unusually brief opinion was mostly a cut and paste from the administration's brief, with the two dissenting justices writing no opinion. As Justice Roberts explained in 1951, they voted against the Constitution to save it. Roosevelt intimidated the court into voting his way after they rejected other key elements of his unconstitutional New Deal. Let's move on to the second reason. Social Security operates in the same fashion as a Ponzi scheme, except it is much worse because it can force you to participate against your will. What makes a Ponzi scheme fraudulent is that it pays people a return from their own investment or from money from new investors rather than from profit. The government takes your money through the payroll tax and immediately uses that to pay a person currently drawing Social Security. This is a Ponzi scheme, except they can take your money and you have no choice to opt out. It is compulsory. A scheme of such widespread, compulsory fraud is unprecedented in U.S. history, and one of the most shameful and popular of FDR's schemes. Private insurance companies invest the premiums of their customers in stocks and bonds and other income-producing assets. Real wealth is created. To better understand why Social Security is fraudulent, one should grasp the valid workings of private sector annuities, pensions, trusts, and similar investment vehicles, and over time pays back funds with a gain. The integrity, safety, and soundness of this private contract-based system fosters saving, investment, and prosperity. If fiduciaries or trustees violate contracts in any way, they can be sued, fined, and/or jailed. More importantly, Americans do not have a legal right to their so-called Social Security contributions. In Fleming versus Nestor, Mr. Nestor sued the federal government claiming he had a right to collect Social Security benefits. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that he, and all workers, have no such property right. I paid in, I contributed, and therefore I deserve my benefits, is, therefore, a common myth among Americans. Congress can change all criteria as to benefit amounts, tax rates, retirement age, etc. Try telling your employer you plan to end your contribution and see how voluntary it is. In fact, your employer must match your so-called contribution, reducing your wages further. Anyway, unless the Ponzi scheme keeps growing and spreading, in time it must collapse, as the outflows swamp inflows. Such schemes are rare and tend not to last long or grow large in a free market, since they aren't mandatory. By the way, it's irrelevant whether a Ponzi perpetrator sets out deliberately to inflict his scheme or instead only ends up with one after many years. Private sector Ponzi schemes have built-in censors, enemies, and anti-fraud laws to prevent and terminate them. Social Security has the opposite, built-in perpetuators, coercion, muzzled and shrinking rivals, a growing pool of serfs, millions of admiring heralds, and a superficial air of legality. The so-called contributions increased steadily from just 2.25% of pay between 1935 and 1953 to 4.50% by 1960, 6.90% by 1970, 8.10% by 1980, and 15.3% by 1990. The income on which these higher tax rates apply has been repeatedly increased. The Social Security Administration pledged that after 1949 the combined payroll tax rate of 6% would apply only to a worker's annual income up to $3,000. Worse, today's high rate applies to as much as $106,800 of annual income, which is more than triple the inflation-adjusted equivalent of $3,000. Instead of paying $1,718/year, 6% on income as high as $28,642, we're now forced to pay $16,340/year, 15.3% on income as high as $106,800, an increase of nearly tenfold. Most inflows were spent immediately on current beneficiaries, a method basic to any Ponzi scheme, and U.S. politicians gave it the cute-sounding name pay-go. In a private pension plan or annuity, the beneficiary receives returns based on what he contributes, plus real investment returns. And assets are held in a legally segregated account which he owns. If a private fiduciary were to unilaterally alter the terms of your annuity or pension, against your own well-being, he'd be prosecuted, fined and/or jailed, and a civil action for restitution would be available to retrieve your assets. In contrast, you can't sue Social Security and you don't own the assets it's taking from you. The Ponzi status of this scheme is also corroborated by its widening net of victims. In 1935 it applied only to workers in commerce and industry. In 1939 it was first applied to seamen and bank employees, then in 1946 to railroad workers, in 1950 to regularly employed farm workers, in self-employed and federal employees lacking pensions, in 1951 to railroad workers, in 1954 to home workers plus state and local government employees, in 1956 to the military, firemen, and policemen, in 1965 to interns, self-employed doctors and tip recipients, in 1967 to clergy, and in 1983 to all federal civilian employees hired after that year, plus Congress, the President, Vice President, federal judges, and workers at non-profit organizations. A private Ponzi scheme that spread so widely would be detected. But when politicians did it, they got elected. Whereas in 1950 total beneficiaries represented 19% of all Americans aged 60 years and older. In 1960 they represented 62% of that group and now, 95%. Real returns adjusted for what was paid in payroll taxes have trailed private sector returns, even though the paid-in sums have skyrocketed. Another obvious sign that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme is the fact that the working age population, 18-65 years old, is dwindling as a multiple of retirees collecting benefits. Yes, Social Security is popular in America, but that's true also for every other fast-growing Ponzi scheme, where the main pain comes as the inflow-outflow ratio shrinks. Now let me finish by briefly highlighting additional reasons to end socialist insecurity. Perhaps a second video will be made if there is demand. Social Security is broke. It is already running deficits close to $50 billion, which will continue to grow. The $738 billion program will add 10,000 baby boomers per day for at least the next 20 years with unfunded liability in excess of $20 trillion. Current budget deficits would be closer to $5 trillion if the federal government had to keep budgets to reflect unfunded obligations in Social Security and Medicare. The Social Security system, passed in 1935, is not a legitimate savings investment insurance program. Under the creed of modern liberalism, the individual citizen is not called to maturity but is instead invited to begin a second childhood. There is no trust fund but in name only. Americans have no property right in their supposed contributions. The Social Security system today is a compulsory, redistributive, unconstitutional, pyramid scheme that contains the seeds of its own destruction. There is only one constitutional solution. There is only one economically and morally sound system. We must end this unjust regime and reclaim our freedom. We can have more income to take home, greater employment, and a much better retirement that we build and own. Thank you for your time. Feel free to comment.